right, thrill seekers. I am here in Paris. I couldn't find a place to shoot the video outside, so I'm here in the apartment that they put me up in Paris. And behind me is Paris, but you can't really see it. Tonight I will be speaking at Librairie Almora, I think is how you pronounce it. So if you're in Paris, come see me. I'm going to talk about my two books that were just translated into French, Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen and Sit Down and Shut Up were both translated into French. So look for that. Also, another reminder that my Patreon supporters can see the first 4 chapters of a novel that I never quite finished. But maybe I'll finish it. I don't know. If you tell me it's good, maybe I'll finish it. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you can go look at that right now and enjoy that. And my podcast is back up. I'm putting new episodes. I haven't put a new episode up for about a week and a half, I guess, because I've been traveling. But there are newer episodes than, those of you who remember it not having any new episodes for a year. Well, there's a lot of new episodes on there, so go dig that groovy stuff. Okay, now I just want to talk about a thing, and I don't know if I'll be able to give any sort of definitive answer, but it's something that I think might come up here while I am in Paris. So if you're French, maybe you'll enjoy this. I don't know. If you're not French, you might not enjoy it. No. If you're if you're not French, you might enjoy it. I don't care. Anyway, I do care, but I'm just waffling. Last night I met with one of the people who translated one of my books, and she asked me something about why doesn't Zen talk about heart? And this reminded me of two French women who came to a retreat that I led in Shizuoka, Japan, many years ago, who left after, I think, the first day of the retreat because of this very reason, because there was not enough heart for them. There's not enough heart or emotion. And they seemed to be convinced that Zen was a path that tried to do away with all emotions and all emotional ups and downs, and they wanted to have the ups and downs of life, because it would not be living if it's not ups and downs, or something like that. It gave me this kind of funny explanation, and then left. And this is a question that comes up too with English speakers, but I think it's more of a thing for people who speak the French language, and it may be a linguistic thing, maybe something that's not getting across in translation, but I'll try to say a little bit of why I think Zen does not talk about the heart, le cœur. And she talked about the French concept of sentiment, which I translated it immediately into sentiment in English, but I don't think it means quite the same thing as sentiment. It's more like feelings. It would be more proper English translation, I think. I'm not a French scholar. I'm just basing this on the conversation I had with this woman last night. So one of the reasons that Zen does not talk about the heart, about the cœur, so much is a lot of what we are getting in the West and France too, most of Europe, certainly America, is coming through Japan. Some of it's coming through Korea, but very little of it's coming through China, I guess a tiny bit. But most of it, I would say, that by and large is coming from Japan. And Japanese culture is a culture in which it is considered to be a bit, I don't know, rude, maybe obnoxious. Maybe that's going too far. But it's not considered to be, it's not okay to talk about your emotions very much in Japan. It really isn't. Even with close friends or spouses, family members, people like that, in America you would certainly talk about your feelings with. It doesn't happen in Japan. Certainly not with coworkers or casual friends. You would never talk about your feelings and your emotions. That's just not the way it's done over there. That's a societal thing. I don't think it's a societal thing that comes from Zen. I don't think we should blame Zen for that, although Zen may be involved in that. But the thing is, if you live in Japan for a long time, as I did, you can kind of, if you're not a Japanese person, eventually I think I was able to kind of get a feeling for how these things are dealt with in Japan, and it's not that they're pushed aside or never dealt with, but they're dealt with in a different way. And it's not that you put all your emotions out there and everybody gets weepy on each other and things like that you might have in the West. It's a very cool sort of way of looking at things, but it's not a way that necessarily denies emotion. So we're getting a lot of that from Japan and Japanese teachers. My teacher, my ordaining teacher was Japanese. My first teacher was American, but his teacher was Japanese. So we're getting a lot of that. And it's not that that Zen doesn't recognize heart as a concept or feelings, or that we're trying to all become Mr. Spock and get rid of all emotion and sentiment. It's a different way of looking at things. And one of the reasons Zen doesn't talk about heart so much is because it does talk about heart quite a lot. Only the translations that we get are not expressing that clearly to us, because there's a Chinese character which is pronounced Shin or Kokoro in Japan. I think it's pronounced very similarly in Chinese. I think it's Hin, like with the X in Chinese. And that is usually translated as mind when we when Zen things are translated into English. Probably when they're translated into other European languages, they're using a similar word rather than heart. But what the character actually represents, and hopefully I'm showing it on the screen here, is a human heart. It's a crude drawing of a heart, which you have to really use your imagination to see that as a heart. I think the lines on the top might be the veins going into the heart, and the little round bit at the bottom is the sort of, bag of blood. That's really gross, but you know that what the heart is, like a big bag of blood with some veins going into it. That is what that character is supposed to represent. And the concept of heart and mind are kind of fused for, well, certainly in Japan they are. I don't want to speak for China, but I think since the concept that the Zenis use came out of China, it's probably fair to say that it's the same deal in China. So when we talk in Zen about sentiment, feelings, emotions, things like that, it is in the context of mind. So these are things that happen in mind, and I think for French culture, certainly for English-speaking cultures, this happens. But I think in French culture, it's even more pronounced. There's a separation between there's mind and there's heart, and we tend to think of these as two different things. So mind is mind, and mind is, when we say mind, we mean the rational, scientific, analytic sort of thing. I think that's what a lot of us mean in English. And when we say heart, we're talking about feelings, emotions, sentiments, all that, goopy stuff. But in Zen, the concepts are the same. So when we talk about mind in Zen, it includes what English speakers and I suppose French speakers would call heart. So it's not addressing. I hate double negatives. It's addressing it, but it's addressing it in a different way from what we're used to. But one of the things that we do talk about in Zen, that my teacher Nishijima Roshi certainly talked about, is the idea of transcending emotions. There is a chapter of Shobo Genzo, which I'm not prepared to drag out because I don't have all my Shobo Genzos here, which is, in the Nishijima cross translation, is called "The Non-Emotional Preach the Dharma." And in most translations of Shobo Genzo, it is given as something like "The Insentient Preach the Dharma." And I know I talked about this in either Don't Be a Jerk or It Came from Beyond Zen. I did my paraphrase of it. I can't remember which book it's in. I'm sorry. Maybe somebody in the comments section can tell you which book it's in. But I know I talked about this, and when I did my paraphrasing of it, I tended to go for the standard translation of insentient rather than non-emotional, because I kind of felt like for my readership they needed to kind of get the standard version before they kind of graduated to the Nishijima version, which is a little different. But I do appreciate Nishijima Roshi's version because his interpretation of that chapter is that when we transcend emotion, when we transcend feeling and sentiment and all of this stuff, then we can preach the Dharma. That doesn't necessarily mean we are rational and scientific and that the Dharma is a kind of science with nuts and bolts and this fits into that and blah blah, etc., that kind of thing, or a cold heartless sort of thing. But it means that we leave the emotions aside. And emotions in this sense, sentiment, feeling, the person I was speaking to yesterday seemed to really want to emphasize the various grades of these things called heart as whole separate things. So sentiment was one thing, feeling was one thing, emotion was one thing when she was talking about it, and they were all separate things. Well, the Zen way of looking at it is to call all of that, and sort of, if you're going to put it in a box, you would put it in the box called thought. So thought would include, when Zennis are talking about thought, that would include feelings, emotions, and so on as all kinds of thought. So when Nishijima Roshi talks about Dogen saying the non-emotional preach the Dharma, he's not talking about just transcending emotions and becoming like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, but also transcending thought and any sort of attachment to the individual self. And when that can be done, then we can preach the Dharma. And the examples given in the chapter by Dogen are examples from nature. So this rain, I don't know if you can hear it, I probably can't, but it's raining out. This rain is preaching the Dharma. And what does he say? Valley streams, something that he would be very familiar with, living as he did up in a mountain. We're preaching the Dharma, and trees preach the Dharma. And these are things which they don't have thought and feeling, well, as far as we know, but they do have a life, and we know that. So that is kind of what Zen is aiming, is always a bad word in Zen, but that's kind of what Zen is aiming for. I don't think I explained that very well, but I tried. So I hope that went somewhere. If you want to ask me specific things about it that maybe I can clarify, put a comment below. I always appreciate those comments. I read almost every comment that I get. Some days I get a lot of comments and I can't read them all, but basically I read them all. So do that if you want. And if you want to support me on my travels through Europe, here's a URL. It is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. And there you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. That is my main way of making a living. I'm actually not. I was saying I was getting paid for the events I'm doing in Europe. I'm not getting paid for these things I'm doing in France, although they're giving me a little money to buy food and stuff every day. So there's that, but this is not a big money-making trip for me. Thank you very much. And as always, this is given for free. So you don't have to donate if you don't want to. So don't leave a comment saying, oh, you're asking for donations, because I put the asking for donations right at the end so you can skip it. But I really want to make sure that those of you who do donate know that I do appreciate that, because that's how I'm getting by. Thank you very much. See you next time. Have a good time all the time. Je m'appelle Brad, je voudrais un pamplemousse.